Morning, Brittany. Can you hear me, Brittany?
Yes, good morning. I can hear you.
Good morning. Good morning. Good seeing you there.
All right, there we go.
Hopefully we have some others chiming in along.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Good morning, Curtis. This is Lee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you. Great. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, I hear you. Great. Yes, sir. I won't hold up everyone from their time. As others come in, they can get in on this. I am recording this for some who may not be able to make it as well too. But this is Miss Brittany Twitty. She's with the North Carolina Prevention.
After 700 feet, turn right, Mount Everest Way.
She's done community resiliency training with our students here. River City Youth Bill. Actually, she did that, I believe it was 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago. So actually, we had 13 students who actually got certified in that. And we really appreciate Brittany and her team coming down to teach our students on mental health, first aid. Today, she will actually be talking with us with mental health first aid health 101 training, which will include, I believe, kids who are actually going through mental health challenges such as anxiety, depression, eating disorders, those type of things as well, and how that we can actually be of help to them in those areas. And recognizing signs and how to actually combat those signs. I'm gonna turn this over to Brittany and let her take over from here.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Let me pull up my PowerPoint here. Okay.
Do I need to, let me see. Let's see.
Okay, perfect.
All right, you got the sharing rights?
It popped up.
Okay.
My computer's just a little slow this morning.
That's all right.
All right, I think.
Yeah. You should be able to share.
I think that'll do it. Okay.
Right.
All right. And then let me know when you can see it. It still has loading. Come on now.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so we're gonna get started. I believe, and Curtis, correct me if I'm wrong, we're doing this in 2 parts, correct?
Yes.
Perfect.
It will be in November.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, so this morning we're kind of just gonna go through some of the bare bones. This is in essence a lot of what I talked to the youth about a couple weeks ago. So I always like to do this with any type of staff and then also with students, just because sometimes it can be helpful to have some of the same language that you're using, and it can be helpful to kind of know a little bit about what we talked about and what language we use, so that way when you're communicating and working with the youth, you kind of can be on the same foot of using that similar language. So, and don't mind me, I'll be like skipping around these slides. All right. So yeah, jumping right in, Youth Mental Health First Aid. This is the name of the program. It was developed, oh boy, probably early 2010, 2012. So this program has been around for a while. It is a global program that people all over the world have been trained in and have certifications in. Its bare bones are working with youth. A lot of youth have been consulted. A lot of youth actually helped in the development of the curriculum, because, you know, if we're going to claim that this helps youth, we got to talk to the youth. So this has been created with a lot of input from young people. All right. So Curtis actually kind of gave a pretty good kind of objective of what we're going to do over these next 2 trainings. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of what mental health first aid looks like, but we're also going to dive into some of the mental health diagnoses and talk about signs and symptoms, because these are the things that you're going to be seeing a lot, especially working with youth. And we'll touch on a little bit crisis and non-crisis situations. So this bare bones of the program is called Algae. With the youth, we talked about these action plans of when they are wanting to either help one of their peers or either for themselves just to understand. So just so we all kind of have a little bit of understanding when we say ALGAE. Let me jump to the slide. There we go. Okay, so when I say ALGAE or you hear action plan, this is kind of what we're talking about. So with the youth, we talked about, okay, the core is assessing, and this is true for you as well. You're going to constantly be assessing, and assess really is observing. So when you're working with the youth, you're noticing things that are different, especially youth that you have a relationship with. It is important to kind of know where's their baseline. Are they a usually highly energetic youth? Are they very talkative? Are they very active, happy, willing to participate? Usually, and then all of a sudden they're not. Or are they just kind of just narrow, kind of just, okay, mid, not too excited, not necessarily sad, that's just their type of personality. So it's very helpful to know that at first. And I always encourage people that if you don't necessarily know that youth very well, because it can take some time to work with the other adults in their life to kind of piece it together. You know, if no one else is kind of, oh, that's just, you know, how they are, that's fine. We're not trying to get everybody to have the same type of reactions, the same personalities. Everyone's an individual. But if you have some concerns, if you're seeing some of these signs and symptoms and you're not really sure what their baseline is, talking to adults in their lives, whether that be family, whether that be coworkers, just to sort of gauge and say, hey, you've known this youth for a while. Tell me a little bit about them. What's their temperature usually? What's their general personality? What do they like to do? What are things that they don't like to do? Just so you can have kind of that standard of, okay, this is how they usually act, because that's a key of these signs and symptoms is we're noticing changes. So you have to have somewhere to start from to know, okay, this is different versus how they typically are. So that's kind of the assess, right? And so once we are observing, we're noticing maybe some things that are going on, we're going to want to do the first A, and that's approaching. So one, we're always assessing for risk of suicide or harm. So if we're hearing our youth talk about harming themselves, if they're talking about harming others, if they are making comments about suicide, and we'll talk about that in the second part next month, just so that way we kind of know what does that even look like if a youth is talking about ending their life or harming themselves. So we will definitely get into that. So we'll know what to look for. But that's our first thing, because anytime we're hearing a youth talk about harming themselves or others or talking about ending their life, that's a crisis situation and we need to intervene. And whether that means calling, emergency 911, whether that means just reaching out to some other adults in their lives to form that support, that's always something we're going to want to take seriously, always. It can be a misconception that it's kind of a cry for attention, and in a lot of ways, sure, it is, but we want to take it seriously. So we'll definitely get into that in detail in our next part. But another key part, we're going to want to listen. It could be easy sometimes to kind of jump in and start talking about, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, or to start talking about ourselves and our experiences. But a key part of this is listening. We want to hear how they are experiencing what they're going through. What words are they using to describe the ways that they are feeling? That is a key part. And we want to make sure we're not being judgmental, because talking about mental health, talking about things that are hard for us, that are our struggles, is not the easiest thing in the world, especially for our youth. So want to make sure that when they do come to us and they do start to tell us about these things that they're struggling with, that we are not casting any judgment on them. So that way they feel open and they want to keep opening up to us. They want to keep sharing with us, and we want them to feel supported and heard and understood. So that's a key role. And then going down to the G, obviously we're going to want to give reassurance. We're going to want to thank them for talking to us, thank them for sharing, acknowledging how difficult it can be, how scary it can be. We're going to want to let them know that this is very common. A lot of people have mental health issues. A lot of people don't even know the language to use when we're talking about mental health. It's very normal. Just so that way they're not feeling self-conscious about, I don't know if they'll understand. And a lot of times we won't understand exactly what they're going through, but letting them know that it's okay to talk about it, that we are a trusted person that they can talk to about these things. That's a key part. And then we're going to encourage help. So whether that be the first E we have here, talking about that professional help, that's where, maybe licensed therapists, if it's like a school setting, school social workers, school counselors, it might even be a medical professional, a doctor, depending on what their challenge is at the time. So we're going to want to make sure that, one, they know that these things exist, these supports exist, and then also talking to them about how that looks. If it is reaching out to a therapist, talking to them a little bit about what that process looks like, because they might not know. This isn't common knowledge. So letting them know that this is the support. If they want it, it's here. We're not pressuring them. We're not pushing it on them. Just letting them know, hey, these are your options. And then we're also going to want to encourage self-help. And this is really important as well, because it can be hard to take that step to a professional. That can seem like a big step. There could also be a lot of barriers that make that hard to do. So encouraging self-help and talking about ways that they can support themselves, ways that we can even in that moment support them, is a really important part of this process. So all of these steps together, these are what we're calling the action plan, right? And the acronym is ALGE, for us to remember, okay, what are the steps? How do we start? Because it can be really difficult when we're hearing youth talk about mental health if we don't have any type of background. So these are steps that are created to give you a launching point, to give you something to say, okay, I'm kind of out of my element here, and that's okay. But let me think, okay, I can listen. I know how to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to give some reassurance. This is meant to be a tool for you to use to help you kind of navigate these tricky and difficult conversations. I also want to talk about culture. Anytime that we are working with anybody, any humans, we got to remember that we all come from different cultures, different backgrounds. We all have different ways that we navigate the world. And I always point out, especially from different cultures, for our youth, they're going to pick up where they come from, right? So their culture is very much wherever their definition of home, wherever they're coming from, that's how they're forming these rules, these society rules. And some of those rules include, you don't talk to other people about what's going on at the house. You don't talk to other people what's going on. You don't tell them that you're having bad thoughts. You don't share this, okay? And so we want to be aware that that very well could be the case for some of the youth that we're working with. And we want to, of course, have respect for that, but also just letting them know that, hey, I know that you've probably been told not to share these things. And I know that that can be hard. And if you want, we can make that partnership with the adults in your life. And then we all kind of talk about it together, but that it's okay to share these things. And it's okay to have these conversations. But they still might not want to talk to us, and that's okay. And then that's when I usually always suggest, if the issue is that they're just unsure, they feel like they're tattletaling or they can't, bringing in whoever those adults are from their home life, from their culture, bringing them into the conversation, because a lot of times opening the doors with them allows the youth to feel like, okay, this is okay. I can talk. I have the support of parents, grandparents, this adult, foster parent, guardian. Then okay, this is a person that I can talk to. So definitely something we want to just keep in mind about how we talk about these things, how we talk about our problems, and who do we go to for support, especially when we're thinking about that encouraging professional help. It might not be just as simple as saying, oh, well, it sounds like you are experiencing some symptoms of depression. Talking to a therapist would be really good. A lot of people haven't been to therapy. They don't know what that looks like. So just letting people know that it is an option for them, but having awareness that they might not want to do that. It can go back to a lot of different reasons, even mistrust of medical communities. So we want to be respectful of that. And instead of just being like, well, this is what you're supposed to do, get over it. Being creative, figuring out, okay, well, how do we figure something else, or how do we address that fear, address those concerns to get them and the youth to that support that they need, right? It can be challenging. I'm sure even in your fields and in your work, that you got to hop in some hoops sometimes, whether it be red tape, whether it be just general conversation, cultural challenge. We're always jumping to the next idea. We're always going to like, okay, our goal is to help these youth. How do we do it? So this is the same thing. We're still going to use those creativity, the ability to adapt, to jump to things. It's going to serve us very well when we're talking about mental health and working with our youth. So as a kind of mental health first aider, and this is part of what the youth got certified in, which is very exciting, but this will be your role as well. It's important to note that we're going to be talking about some of these mental illnesses and diagnoses, but we are not diagnosing the youth, right? We are not going to say, hey, you have anxiety and general depression. That's not our role, right? We're leaving that to the therapists, the medical doctors. Our role is to know, okay, I know some signs and symptoms of depression, and I think this youth is having some of these. That's fine to make those connections, but we're not saying, hey, you have depression, right? We are just noticing changes. We are noticing these signs and symptoms, and it's okay if we kind of connect them to certain illnesses. That's okay, but communicating that to them and saying, point blank, you have anxiety, you have depression, you have an eating disorder. That's not our role, right? We are doing those steps that I talked about, those allergy action steps. We're listening, we're observing, we are letting them know of these supports, we are being the support, and we're also, we're that link to kind of help connect them to these supports. Medical professionals, just even talking about those encouraging self-help, that can be us kind of bridging that gap, but we're not diagnosing, we're not treating people. That is not our role, and having this understanding does not mean that you have that. This is really just laying a foundation of information, because mental health is not, it's more talked about, but it's still not widely known, and talking about these signs and symptoms is not super common as well. So this is just putting us all on the same page to say, okay, this is what these things look like. It's okay to make these connections, but I can't give out a medical license through this. So this is just kind of to have some support, to feel confident that, okay, I know that this is a sign and symptom. I learned this. I know that this is a symptom that I need to have concern about. That's kind of what our role is. Yeah. Another thing that we want to do is, we all have bad days, right? We all have days where we are just not having it. And a lot of times we still have to go to work. We still have to do the things of our daily lives that we have to do. And something with youth mental health first aid is, just because you have this information, that doesn't mean that you are kind of like always on call, right? That doesn't mean that at any time you're like, okay, I'm noticing the sign and symptom, I gotta go talk to this youth. And then, you finish that conversation and then you look over and you're like, oh, that youth as well, I've been noticing some things with them, let me go talk to them. Because it can be hard. It can be draining to have these conversations. So it's important that ourselves, we are in the right space before jumping into these conversations. And so sometimes we might not be the right person to talk to them. If we're just having a bad day, if we're off, if maybe we've already had a really tough conversation that morning with someone else, it might not be the best idea to jump into another possibly difficult conversation with another youth in the afternoon, right? Whether that be just tagging out to another staff, another coworker, bringing in other adults who can provide that support, that's okay to do. And that is our role, is to be aware of where we are. Are we at a good place to provide support? Because we don't want to just jump into something just because, okay, I feel like I have to, so let me jump in, and then we're distracted, so we're not listening, right? We are not hearing the words that they're saying, so we make a suggestion that maybe they just said they already tried or they didn't want to do. And then they feel, well, they're not listening to me, I'm not going to open up, right? So sometimes we can actually do more harm by thinking we have to jump in every time, rather than just taking a moment, stepping back, and tagging in someone else who could provide that support. So just things that we wanna keep in mind. And these are also some resources, and I will make sure that I email these out. Curtis, I'll definitely make sure that I put these resources, and I always encourage everyone to put these in your phone, because they can be really helpful just to save them as contacts, or I have a little note in my phone of these websites just to have, because this might be a resource that you can give to a youth. I've even the suicide prevention line, and even some of the chats, I've actually been with a youth while they've been on the phone, just because they want that support, you know. So these are always helpful to have, and I'll definitely make sure that you have these so you can save them or even have access to them. Some of my organizations even essentially print something like this out and have it posted community-wide, whether it be like a bulletin board. I see that a lot, so that could be a good idea. Just so they're visible, and just letting our youth know that it's normal to have these issues, and it's normal to need support, and just even having them publicly displayed shows that, you know, we support you, and it's okay if you need to use these. So I will make sure that you have access to these.
Appreciate that a lot.
Perfect. All right, so let's jump into kind of mental health, right? The reason that a lot of times when we're talking about why are these conversations so difficult to have, right? A lot of it is because of mental health stigma. We talk about a certain type of person has mental health challenges, you know, or if someone talks about having a mental health challenge, it can be easy to kind of say, well, if you're religious, maybe just like pray more, pray harder, or if it's something where, hey, everybody feels this way, but you got to keep going, pull yourself up, let's go, keep moving, right? And so with that, we don't allow for a lot of space for people just to exist, for people just to say, hey, I'm struggling. I know that I need to do this. I've tried to pull myself up. I can't, right? And that can be really hard to admit. So keeping in mind that our youth can very much feel that way as well. And depending on the culture and the family situation that they come from, they might already have these ideals in their heads. And so we want to be respectful of that, but also kind of correcting some of these societal things that are wrong, these societal myths that are very common to spread. So, and when we're talking about stigma is basically just negative attitudes towards people that have mental health challenges, right? We see it in TV, movies, even songs. You know, we talk about people who are crazy and wild and all of these things. So we want to know that that's very common, and it can keep people from sharing, because if they hear, oh, well, I don't want them to think I'm crazy because I'm having thoughts of like harming myself. We want them to know that they can talk to us about these things, and that it doesn't mean that they're crazy. It doesn't mean all of these other things. It just means that, hey, this is where they're at right now. These are thoughts that they're having, and there's something to be done. Because keeping it inside and pretending it doesn't exist, it's not just going to go away. And we want them to know that, to even help encourage them to open up to us. First language, this kind of comes with stigma. It can be easy just to kind of throw out a lot of language that we don't understand or just language that we've heard. So it's important that we're putting the person first. We're putting that youth first. You know, we're not calling them, oh, you are depressed, you are anxious, right? They are a person with depression. They are a person with anxiety. And so it's important that we are mindful of the language that we're using, especially if it comes to substance use. I see that a lot with youth, you know, calling people druggies or saying that they're like tweakers or all these other terms. That's very stigmatizing, and that's not going to make a person feel good about themselves. And it's definitely not going to make them want to open up to us if that's the language. If they perceive that we are being judgmental from the jump, they're not going to want to open up to us. So kind of taking some time and being a little mindful about the language that we're using. You know, a person that uses drugs or a person that uses substances, right? We want to make sure that they are always a person before their challenge, before their struggle. And even it can be helpful that I find that if you're hearing the language used among youth or even among your coworkers, right? Or people that you're around, to kind of gently correcting that, because even if you are not the one using the language, saying that, hey, let's say this and instead of that, right? We want to be mindful and we want to be respectful of people. Even you just saying that, if a person is struggling or falls into one of those categories, they seeing you kind of correct that language might have something in their head of like, okay, this could be a person that I can open up to. This could be a person that I could trust. It could really have a large impact on someone, especially our youth. So we just want to be mindful of the words that we're using, because language is very, very powerful and can have a large impact. So mental health, when we're talking about mental health, it is a word that can kind of be thrown around, but a general definition, mental health is a state of well-being in which a young person or anyone, right? They're realizing their own abilities. They can cope with the normal stressors of life. They can work productively, and they can contribute to their community in the ways that they desire to. When we're talking about mental health, that doesn't mean that you never are sad. That does not mean that you never have a bad day. That doesn't mean that you're never angry. Mental health does not mean that you are just happy all the time. You're just ready to go, right? We all have days where we're angry, sad, we are not our best selves. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have a mental illness. That just, things happen, right? And so when we're talking about mental health and when we're looking at these signs and symptoms, we're thinking about, okay, are they able to do the things that they want to do? Are they able to do the things that they need to do? Are they sad to a point where they're not going to school, where they can't focus? These are things where it's like, okay, that could be an indicator that there's a larger mental health challenge, a possible mental illness, right? Our goal isn't to just have everybody be happy 24/7, 365, right? Not possible. And we want to make sure that our youth understand that as well, that the issue isn't that we're not observing them being happy. That's not the issue. What we're saying is that, hey, we know how you normally are, and we're just noticing you're different, and we want to be there. We want to check in and see if everything's okay, because you're acting a little different. And it's okay that, you know, you're upset or you're angry about something. That's totally fine. But we're here just to let you know that if you're feeling things that feel out of control, or that you can't do the things that you usually do, that, okay, this could be a mental health challenge that is bigger, and there's something that we can do about it. Mental disorders. So these are the things that we're going to talk about when we're saying depression and anxiety, general anxiety, eating disorders, bipolar. All of these things are mental disorders, mental illness, diagnoses. However, those words can kind of be used interchangeably, but at their core, the thing they have in common. So mental disorders are a diagnosable disorder that, one, it's going to affect that person's thinking, the way that they are displaying their behaviors, the ways that they are thinking, literal mental disorders impact our brains. You know, scientists show that when we do brain scans of someone who is living with a mental health disorder and someone who is not, literally their brains look differently. The way that they take in information, the way that they make decisions, the way that they interpret things, all of it is different. And so we want to be aware of, okay, this is going to change the way that we interact with people. This is going to change the way that they take in information, the way that they react to something that's sad or a disappointment. If they have a mental disorder, it might make it seem more heightened, right? Of something of, hey, do you have a red pen? Like, oh, actually, I don't have any more red pens, but I have a blue pen, right? That seems very simple. That seems like, oh, that should not be a big deal. But if someone has a mental disorder that we don't understand, that could be a really big deal to them. Or it could just be totally apathetic. I don't even want a pen. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to use one, right? Whatever the situation is, we just want to be mindful, because when we start to have kind of those rules where we think this isn't a big deal, it shouldn't be a big deal, a person should react in this way, right? When we start having these rules and our youth and people don't fit into it, it can be easy just to think, what's wrong with them? Why are they making such a big deal of this? Why aren't they just doing their work? Why aren't they just talking? Why aren't they just not talking sometimes, right? Being quiet. One, with youth, that is a lot of just being a youth, but also just imagining that the things that we think are normal and the way that we would respond, that's not how everybody's going to respond. And we want to be mindful, and we don't want to make our youth think that because they think a different way that something is wrong with them, or that something they need to change the way that they're thinking, right? We just want to be aware that we all, one, have different thoughts. We all interpret the world differently. And then knowing that if someone is struggling with a mental health challenge or has a mental health disorder, that the way that they're taking in information is going to be wildly different than the way that we might societally see how this rule is. And it's going to greatly impact these things in their lives, right? Work, school, just their daily living, showering, brushing their teeth, taking medication, like doing all of these things, having those relationships, those friendships. Having a mental disorder is going to impact all of that in a lot of different ways, but it's absolutely going to have an impact. So mental health continuum, this is really, we just want to remember that, like we were just talking about, mental health and just health in general, that looks a lot of different ways, right? And so sometimes we're going to see some of our youth that are displaying some of these signs and symptoms. That does not necessarily mean that they have a mental health disorder, right? We all kind of fluctuate between states within our mental health, right? We have good days, something can happen, an upsetting event can happen that kind of switches. Yeah, we're upset, we're sad, you know, there could be a lot of different things going on that impacts how we're feeling, how we're interacting with the world. So we want to keep in mind that A doesn't always necessarily equal B, right? Or that just because someone's having a bad day, it doesn't automatically mean, okay, they have a mental illness, right? It could just be a bad day, and they might still need support, but it might not be something as, okay, they're sad, they automatically have depression, or they're worried about something, they automatically have anxiety. Those things aren't necessarily always A equals B, 2 is 2. So we want to just keep that in mind and just have that awareness and give people that space to exist kind of freely. Also, mental disorders are very common, right? It says 1 in 5. I would definitely say it's a lot higher, especially because of the pandemic. So we want to make sure that we are just keeping in mind that these are a lot more common than you would think, that just because maybe we don't have a big frame, or we think we don't know someone who has a mental disorder, you probably do. Average of people that you interact with, you're going to know at least one person, usually multiple people that have some type of mental disorder, right? And so just keeping in mind that also goes back to our language. We want to make sure that we're not using stigmatizing language. We're not using judgmental language, just so that way we're not automatically kind of pushing these people to the side that we don't even know. And it can be helpful for our youth to understand that, yes, they're young people, but they can have mental disorders too. And that just because of their age, it doesn't mean that the challenges that they have are necessarily going to last throughout their life, but also that they're not the only child who's ever felt this way. They're not the only teen who has ever felt this way. And that it's very common. And they probably even have people in their friend groups, in their schools, in the circles that they run in that are feeling either the same way or are dealing with their own kind of mental health challenge. So just letting them know this is very normal. It's very common. There's a reason that this program exists in the first place, right? There has to be a significant amount of people who are struggling in order for this to even be a concept, for even this training to exist. So that can be helpful just to let them know that, hey, you're not alone in this. I know it can feel like you're the only person who's ever felt this way. It can feel like you're the only one that knows this, but you're not. You are not alone in this. Even though I personally don't know exactly what you're talking about, I know that it's common and I know that it's going to be okay. And here's how we can do that. Here's how we can make things better, make things okay. Now this, I'm gonna see, this should play, but this video is basically, so we're talking about risk factors. Might be a term that you've heard before, but these are situations, they kind of give their own definition about it. But we're talking about, okay, what are some risk factors, especially with our youth? These are things that we want to be aware of. And then how do we balance the scale with protective factors, things that are going to help support where these risk factors can kind of increase risk. So let me know if you can't hear it, and I will try something else.
As a mental health first aider, you play a critical role in responding to the signs and symptoms of a mental health challenge in a child or youth. This video will prepare you to promote the mental health of young people by understanding the things that influence their lives. It will help you identify when children and youth are facing increased risk and the valuable role you play in building up young people's strengths and connecting them with positive supports that are linked to healthy growth and development. Risk factors are experiences that can increase the risk of a young person developing a mental health challenge. Risk factors can be biological, like a family history of mental illness, psychological, like experiencing traumatic stress. They can be caused by losing a loved one or going through a divorce, or they can be a result of being bullied or living in poverty. One risk factor that is especially important for first aiders to know about is trauma, a risk factor for nearly all mental health and substance use disorders. Trauma results from an event or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and overall well-being. Traumatic experiences that happen during childhood are called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs can include experiencing or witnessing violence and abuse, instability due to parental separation, or the incarceration of a member of the household. Such experiences can make children feel unsafe, insecure, or even impact bonding with caregivers. The good news is, many children demonstrate a remarkable ability to overcome the challenges caused by ACEs. The ability to overcome these challenges is called resilience. A network of support is key in helping children develop resilience. In fact, the most common factor for children who are able to develop resilience is having at least one stable, committed relationship with a supportive adult. Building resilience works like this. Think about a scale or teeter-totter. On one side are risk factors, but on the other side are protective factors. Protective factors can be biological or psychological. including body regulation, emotion regulation, and critical thinking skills. Protective factors can also be connected to family, school, and social supports, like interactions with supportive adults. Adults can help children learn to cope and connect them with supportive community resources to reduce risk and promote more protective influences in the child's life. Supportive adults like you can tip the scales toward resilience.
So we see during that video, they talked about risk factors, and risk factors can look a lot of different ways. They talked about coming from parents who are divorced, having even a parent or a guardian that is incarcerated, can have substance use, any type of abuse, being involved in the foster care system. And they talked about trauma. Trauma is huge. A lot of people, all of us have trauma in our own ways, right? But the impacts of trauma, it's literally stored in our bodies. It can have a physical manifestation, right? There's a lot of research, especially now going into certain therapies that can help release literally stored trauma by doing certain therapies and doing certain breathing and even stretching to help release literal stored up trauma in your body. And so that has a huge impact on the way that we live our lives. And that's even for adults. So thinking about that for youth, right, who are going through these things and who don't have a lot of control over a lot of aspects of their life. If they're in a situation in their household where abuse is happening, where they aren't feeling supportive, they can't just usually, right, just pack up their things, go get an apartment, like do these things. That's not typically just something they're able to just up and do, right? We want to be mindful that there is a level of, they don't have a lot of autonomy over the things that are going on, right? They have to go to school. There's all of these things that they have to do. And that within itself can cause a lot of stress and put a lot of pressure on them. So we want to make sure that we are balancing that scale. We are providing that stable relationship with a supportive adult. That could be us. We might be the program, even like the youth build, however, our relationship, that might be the one stable, consistent thing in their lives, right? And that's a really important role. And we can really have a lot of positive impact just by being that person for them. And being acknowledged that youth are resilient. They're very, very resilient. They have a great ability to bounce back, right? But that doesn't mean that the things that they're going through aren't important and aren't impactful of their life. Just because they have the ability to keep going, that doesn't mean that these traumatic situations aren't traumatic. And having some acknowledgement for that and letting them know that, yes, you're managing to still go to school when you are being abused at home, right? That doesn't mean that that abuse isn't impactful. That doesn't mean that that abuse is just, oh, we just brush it off because you're still like going to school, right? That those things don't go hand in hand. And being aware of that, not only for ourselves, but also communicating that to our youth that, hey, yeah, I see that your grades aren't great, but you're also going after school to a place where there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of substance use. You might not have food, you might not have electricity, you might not have all of these things. So yeah, it makes sense that even though you manage to make it to school every day, your grades aren't going to be the best. You're not getting enough sleep. Like, just helping point out these things, because they can easily think that something is wrong with them. Like, why can't I remember these things? Why can't I focus? Why can't I do my homework? They can beat themselves up and then not be able to see the bigger picture of course, these things make sense why you're not able to focus in school and can't stay awake, because you don't get sleep when you're outside of this building, So just being aware of that and helping them make those connections can help them feel a little less alone and understand what's going on with them. We also want to remember that it can be easy. I hear a lot that youth can't go through a lot, or it can't be that bad because of their age. And that's not true. We see that these are the median ages, right? So this doesn't mean that any youth that gets to age 6 is going to have an anxiety disorder. That's not what this is saying. It's also not saying that, once a youth gets past age 6, they will never have an anxiety disorder. That's not what this is saying. This is just in general of the young people who have these diagnosed disorders. This is just the median. This is just what half of them, this was the age that these symptoms started, right? This is just a screenshot of the ages that our youth could start impacting mental disorders. So at age 6, anxiety disorders, age 11, ADHD and other behavior disorders, 13 mood disorders, and substance use at age 15. And like I said, these are just median. This is just really to show the picture of there's not a certain age that youth have to make it to, right? If you can get to age 10 without any issues, you'll be set for life. Or if we can get them to age 15 without using any substances, they'll be good. That's not how this works, right? We just want to be aware that yes, youth as young as age 6 can have mental health disorders. They can have challenges because they can also have a lot of trauma at age 6, since that they can, of course, have a lot of mental health challenges even as young as age 6.
Brittany, here's a question. That chart that you just showed a while ago.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that that the way society is going, as things continue to progress the way they are, that this median could actually shift even lower.
I agree. Yeah, I think that that's absolutely true, especially I know that this was actually updated literally right before the pandemic. And so they're already working on updating it because all of these numbers are shifting wildly, right? We all kind of collectively experience this trauma, and it is having so much more of an impact mentally than I think we even could have prepared for. So I think you're absolutely right, especially the young children who were kind of school aged, but not really getting that typical school experience. How is that impacting their development? How is that impacting their function? And that is just an open gateway for things like mental health disorders to just sort of ease their way in. So I fully agree. I think you're absolutely right.
It'd be interesting to know exactly, what the median was, maybe like 10, 20 years ago, to see exactly significant of a change that we've seen.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to awareness, because I would say even 10 years ago, we weren't really talking about mental health like this. Like this program, I mean, it really didn't even, just barely existed 10 years ago. So I think the more that we are doing research, the more that we're aware, we start to see, oh, actually, these things are a lot younger than we thought. Like these things are impacting us in ways that we didn't even really understand. So yeah, I fully agree. I think it's a good point. Yeah.
Impacting, both ways, the student as well as the child, as well as the family as a whole.
Absolutely. I think it has a huge impact on the family unit, the structure, in ways that I think that we still, I really want to be researched, because even if you're maybe not the one who's having the mental health challenge, how does it impact the family unit as a whole? How does it impact the people that are around you? That's also something that's well worth being talked about. So, all right. So we have right here about 10 minutes. So I'm just going to jump into some of these disorders just to kind of let you know, okay, this is what this means. Because sometimes we can talk about depression, anxiety, even like bipolar. If you don't really know what that means, it can be difficult to even have conversations about mental health. So I'm just going to go through these, and I will make sure I even believe I have a handout that has these, and I'll make sure that you have it so that way you can have this as like kind of a reference to go back to. But so depressive disorders, when you hear depression, that's kind of what we're talking about. So that can be defined as a sad or a low mood that persists for at least 2 weeks. So with this, you see how it says at least 2 weeks. When we're talking about signs and symptoms, which we will get into in next month, when we're talking about that, we're thinking about the length of time. right? This isn't someone who they come to us on a Monday and they are just really sad and just has low energy. We're not like, oh, they have depression, right? Something could have happened that had them to have this mood, right? But let's say on Monday they come in and they have a sad or low mood, and all that week they're same, and then all that next week they're the same, and then even into the third week they're still having this very low mood, very sad. Okay, we're starting to notice a significant shift that's different than normal. It could be the sign of a depressive disorder, right? And depression is not just necessarily being sad. They don't have to be crying for it to equal depression. It can just be low energy. It can be numbness, kind of that apathy of they don't care about anything. That could be a sign of depression. That's not necessarily just being sad or showing physically with crying that they're in a mood. It can look a lot of different ways depending on the person. But once again, we're thinking about how long is this happening and what is it impacting? Are their grades dropping significantly? Is their participation in sports, after school activities? Are they not wanting to meet with like their mentors? Are they what else is impacting because they're feeling this way? That's a key for all of these mental disorders. Anxiety. So anxiety is a feeling of a threat or a worry that is caused by perceived threats in the environment. So with anxiety, like I said, a lot of people have something called test anxiety. You might have even have heard that. Fairly common of when situations, whether it be in school of a test or even like presenting, like doing something like this, very normal to feel a little anxious, to feel a little stressed about it. I'd say those are very typical, right? You're able to do it, and then after you're like, whew, okay, I feel much better. That's not necessarily the indicator that there's an anxiety disorder. That's kind of just our general day-to-day normal anxious feelings, right? We're looking at the perceived threats. For us, we might not see that anything is wrong, right? But it's about that person, that youth, and what are they perceiving? What are they worrying about, right? Especially if for us, we might think, I don't think that's rational, right? We could, in our heads, we could be thinking that. It could be the symptom of a greater disorder because we can't even see that threat. But for them, they perceive it as a threat and it is really impacting their life, right? We're going to think about the severity with anxiety. And once again, that length of time. How long is it happening? Is it always there? That bubbling kind of worry, that bubbling stress, is it just persistent no matter what they're doing? That could be the sign of an actual more anxiety disorder rather than just your general kind of stress and anxiety. It's impacting their relationships. It's impacting the way that they navigate life because they are worried about situations, right? And trauma can have a huge impact on anxiety, the things that they've experienced. And we even talk about a little bit PTSD. Those can sometimes go hand in hand. But based on what they've experienced, that's maybe why they're having those threats or they're perceiving threats. And that could greatly impact their lives and could definitely be the sign of a greater anxiety disorder. Eating disorders. So there is a kind of variety of different specific diagnoses that can go within eating disorders. You might have even heard of anorexia or bulimia. Those are kind of specific disorders within this kind of umbrella of eating disorders. But generally, these are illnesses in which people experience severe disturbances in their eating behaviors and related thoughts and emotions. So for some people, it can be eating a lot. For some people, it can be stop eating completely. For some, it can be eating and then vomiting after. They don't have to look the same way, and they look different for a lot of people. Also important to note that people with any body type can have an eating disorder. It's kind of societally kind of acknowledged and believed that people who are just very thin have eating disorders. No, you can be in a larger body and have an eating disorder because it's not about what your actual physical body looks like. It's about your eating behaviors and your thoughts around that, right? So that's important for us to think about. And some of the things we might notice are, if we're noticing a youth not eating. If we're in a situation where we have snacks or meal times, lunch, we're noticing that they're not eating consistently, right? Or if we're noticing that they are eating a lot consistently, right? I think sometimes we also have to think about their home life, because it can also be very common that if they're not eating at home, whenever they get food, they're going to want to eat a lot just because they don't know where the next one's going to come from. So we're wanting to keep in mind, yes, how we're physically seeing the way that they're eating or not eating, but we're also going to look for other signs and symptoms. Is their mood also very low? Are they also very apathetic? Are they talking a lot more than usual about how their body looks? Are they making comments negatively about their body and saying things about like, oh, I need to be on a diet, or no, I can't eat that, it's too much carbs, right? We're going to want to start to like compile all of this, and the combination of these things could lead to an eating disorder. Because youth, where appearance is very important, especially in our youth. So you can hear youth make comments about their appearance. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a sign of an eating disorder, but if we're noticing their thoughts around food and their behaviors around food change, coupled with these verbal kind of negative thoughts about their body, that can be the sign. And either way, we can engage. Either way, we can just say, hey, I've noticed that this past week, you're usually, you're good with the lunch. Like, you haven't really been eating, like, not feeling the food, not, and it can be very casual, but just to have a gauge of kind of what's going on, that's fine for us to do. And that's what we're going to want to do. Psychotic disorders. So these are a little more, I'm going to say rare. I'm not going to say impossible. But typically we see these with older youth and even young adults. So even kind of 21, typically even late 20s for the most part. But that does not mean that we will not encounter youth and young people that are having these. So this is an illness where psychosis is a main feature. And so that can include a loss of contact with reality. So there can be visual hallucinations, there can be auditory hallucinations, seeing things that aren't there, believing in things that aren't based in a kind of our shared reality, and include those severe disruptions in their thinking and emotions and behaviors. Like I said, less common, but between usually higher 20s is when we're going to see these things. But if we're seeing those signs, we're definitely going to want to intervene. Substance use disorders, very common in youth. This is kind of that diagnosable pattern of substance use that disrupts their ability to go to school, to have relationships, and participate in their activities. And this can be a variety of substances, whether it be alcohol, whether it be tobacco, cannabis. It's not just the fact that they're using it, which yes is illegal based on their age, but it is the dependence on it. It is impacting their ability to get a job, keep a job, coming to school under the influence. These are the things where it's a lot more likely that it is an actual disorder rather than kind of just, youth just experimenting with things and trying things. ADHD, this is, I feel like kind of common. I hear a lot. It is a disorder which is hyperactivity, inattention, impulsivity, or a combination is greater than what's expected for their age. So this is not necessarily the kid that's just like running around at recess and has a lot of energy. That could just be a child, just be a youth, right, with a lot of energy. It is, a lot of times you'll see it in their schoolwork, right, and their behaviors. They're not able to sit down and kind of follow, okay, you have to sit in the school for 8 hours and do this. That's challenging for anybody, but it is greatly impacting their grade, their ability to listen, their ability to kind of do things. So this could definitely be where a medical professional could be helpful to come in and kind of pay more attention to those behaviors. Conduct, disruptive, and impulse control. Those can kind of go hand in hand sometimes with ADHD. Next month, we're going to talk about the signs and symptoms, and some things are very commonly youth, not wanting to do things that they're told, not wanting to do chores. very common. Even adults don't want to do that, right? But being able to literally have maybe an extreme physical and extreme emotional reaction just to being told to do something, that could be the sign of an impulse control disorder or a conduct or disruptive disorder. It can cause them to behave angrily or aggressively towards people or even property. And especially when we're thinking about how long is this happening? Are there multiple instances? We want to keep these in mind as well. And then hitting on trauma. We just talked about trauma and how big of an impact that it can have. Something like PTSD, based on an event that they experienced, they could feel like that event could happen again. They could have anxiety and stress and worry that it can't happen again. And so that could be the sign of something like PTSD. So we want to keep that in mind as well. All right, and so I'm going to wrap up here because we are at time and I want to be respectful of your time. But that's kind of our first kind of introduction. So if there are any questions, I can definitely answer those, and we'll get into more, like I said, in our part 2 next month.
Anyone have any questions?
No,
Nope, all good.
all good.
All right, thank you so much.
I'd like to thank you, Brittany, for the first hat that you've given to us on mental health. Very informative information. It's eye-opening, about the median age that is currently on the chart. But it'd be interesting to know exactly what the median age would be like, once it's updated, to see exactly how much it has actually shifted, with our young people. Also, knowing that it's 1 in 5, youth in the U.S. that, that basically go through a mental health disorder. That's shocking as well too. Those numbers are very, very close there. And I went down that'll shift again as well too. And then basically you also giving us a good understanding of the various different types of disorders, being that there's 8 different ones, and then basically expounding on those 8 different disorders that youth actually take. That goes through a youth life. A lot of times, we think about ourselves as adults and so forth, but in this day and time, the youth are actually going through a whole lot more. And a lot of times they're silent and they don't speak these things out. And yet, we shouldn't, like you said before, that we live in a culture where we've been taught, to hold things in and don't speak, what's going on inside your family life and so forth. But these things are detrimental to a person's, especially to youth, to their lives, because, they can hold in things, but, only but for so long before, pretty much, comes to a head, and then basically pretty much, things get chaotic and out of control.
Absolutely. I agree.
We look forward to seeing Ms. Twitty, I believe on November the 21st. I believe it'll be our next Zoom meeting, which will be at the same time. I will send out a link again if Ms. Twitty wants me to do that for the next Zoom. And Ms. Twitty, this presentation that you sent here, will you be sending this to me? That way I can actually send it to them if they wanted to have this information.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. Yeah, I'll edit it down and to the ones that we talked about, and I'll be happy to send you a PDF, so that way it's all together, and that includes these disorders that we just went through.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to say thank you very much to each and every one of you who have joined this Zoom. And I'll make sure that I'll get this information out to you as well too. And everyone have a wonderful, wonderful day today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great training there, Ms. Tyler.
Thank you. Thank you.